A single, simple rule defines our understanding of the past. Progress is linear. We moved from stone to bronze to iron, from sail to steam to silicon. But what if the archaeological record holds evidence that breaks this rule? Not myths, not legends, but physical objects. Objects of impossible origin and baffling technology that were never supposed to exist. They were found buried, hidden, or simply misunderstood. They are the anomalies. And they point to a terrifying possibility that history as we know it is not just incomplete, it is wrong. We are about to examine 10 artifacts that defy every explanation. Subscribe to the Forbidden Archives as we begin a journey into the impossible. Let us know in the comments which artifact you think is the most unexplainable. Our investigation starts not with a bang, but with the silent, precise ticking of a 2,000-year-old clockwork cosmo. The Antikythera Mechanism, a clockwork cosmos in ancient Greece. The Mediterranean Sea, 1900. A storm-battered sponge diver named Elias Stadiates surfaces from the wreckage of a Roman cargo ship off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, his eyes wide not with treasure, but with terror. He babbles of seeing a heap of rotting corpses and horses strewn across the seabed. What he had stumbled upon was not merely a shipwreck, but a time capsule from the 1st century BCE, a vessel laden with bronze and marble statues, fine glassware and coins. Among this haul of classical art, retrieved over a painstaking salvage operation, was a lump of corroded bronze and wood no larger than a shoebox. It was unremarkable, seemingly a piece of nautical junk, and was catalogued and shelved in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens with little fanfare. For nearly 2 years it sat there, this greenish lump, until it cracked open. Inside, the museum staff glimpsed the faint, precise glint of gear wheels. This was not junk. It was a machine of a complexity that would not be seen again for over a millennium. They had found the Antikythera Mechanism. The standard narrative of technological progress is a comforting upward slope. We moved from stone to bronze to iron. The ancient Greeks gave us philosophy, democracy, and geometry. The Romans gave us law, engineering, and roads. The intricate, precision machinery of gears and dials belongs to the Renaissance, to the clockmakers of medieval Europe, and later to the Industrial Revolution. The Antikythera Mechanism shatters this linear timeline. It is an analog computer of breathtaking sophistication, constructed in the 2nd or 1st century BCE. Its purpose, as decades of painstaking research using advanced imaging technology has revealed, was to predict celestial events. It could model the irregular orbit of the moon, predict solar and lunar eclipses decades in advance, and track the cycles of the Panhellenic Games. It displayed the positions of the sun, moon, and possibly the 5 known planets against the backdrop of the zodiac. It was, in essence, a portable hand-cranked simulation of the universe. The crack in this story is not the mechanism's existence, but its absolute isolation. It is a technological supernova that appears in the historical record, shines with impossible brilliance, and then vanishes without a trace for 1,500 years. Where is the lineage? Where are the prototypes, the simpler versions, the treatises on its design? The writings of Cicero mention a device built by Archimedes that could model the planetary motions, but this was considered legend. The Antikythera Mechanism is not a legend, it is physical evidence. Its gears include a sophisticated differential gear, a component once thought to have been invented in the 16th century, and its front and back dials are covered in hundreds of tiny, precisely engraved Greek characters, an instruction manual for the cosmos. This level of miniaturization and precision engineering implies a workshop tradition, a school of thought, a sustained intellectual and artisanal effort that has left no other physical evidence. It is as if we found a functioning smartphone in a Napoleonic-era shipwreck. The primary evidence is the object itself, now fractured into 82 corroded fragments. For years, its secrets were locked inside, visible only as tantalizing glimpses through the cracks. The first major breakthrough came in the 1970s with gamma and X-ray imaging by physicist Charalambos Karakalos and historian of science Derek de Sala Price. Their work revealed the true complexity of the gearing system. Price would famously call it an ancient Greek computer. But the true revolution came in the early 2000s with the Antikythera Mechanism research project, AMUP. Using microfocus, X-ray, computed tomography, and polynomial texture mapping, a team of international scientists, including Mike Edmonds, Tony Freeth, and Xenophon Mousers, was able to virtually unwrap the fragments. They could read inscriptions that had been invisible for 2,000 years, revealing functions far beyond what anyone had imagined. They decoded a 223-month Saros dial for predicting eclipses, a 76-year Callipic cycle dial, and even a dial for the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, including the Olympics. The back of the device was a complex astronomical calculator. The front was a dazzling display of the ancient cosmos in motion. The implications are profound. This was not a toy for the rich. It was a serious scientific instrument, likely based on the advanced astronomical and mathematical theories of figures like Hipparchus of Rhodes. It represents a fusion of abstract Greek geometrical theory with supreme Babylonian arithmetical data and masterful Hellenistic engineering. It proves that the ancient world came far closer to a mechanical conception of the universe than we ever believed. The motive for its historical obscurity is not an active cover-up, but a collapse. The knowledge required to build it, the metalworking, the astronomy, the mathematics, was part of a highly specialized, likely royally patronized tradition in the Hellenistic world. The Roman conquest of Greece, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and the gradual shift of intellectual energy to the Arab world and later medieval Europe may have severed this specific thread of mechanistic thinking. The knowledge didn't disappear. It may have been translated, abstracted, and lost its physical, mechanical expression. The mechanism is a ghost of a lost scientific path. The unanswered question is not just who made it, but what else did they make? If this device was on a ship heading from the Greek world to Rome, it was likely a luxury export item. How many others existed? Were there planetaria in the libraries of Alexandria or Pergamon? Did this tradition influence later Islamic automata or Chinese astronomical clocks, or is it a truly independent, dead-end breakthrough? The most haunting possibility is that the Antikythera Mechanism is the sole survivor of an entire genre of complex ancient technology. Its very existence forces us to redraw the map of human ingenuity, inserting a peak of mechanical genius in an era we had consigned to philosophy and simple mechanics. It stands as a silent, corroded rebuke to our assumptions of historical linearity, whispering that the path of progress is not a slope, but a range of mountains, with peaks that can be scaled, forgotten, and scaled again under different names, centuries later. The Baghdad Battery, electroplating in antiquity. In the basement of the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad, prior to the looting that accompanied the 2003 invasion, sat a group of the most quietly controversial artifacts in archaeological history. They were unassuming terracotta pots, roughly the size of a man's fist, each sealed with an asphalt stopper. Through each stopper passed an iron rod, surrounded by a copper cylinder. Found in 1936 during excavations at Qujat Rabu, a Parthian village near Baghdad, and dated to between 250 BC and 250 AD. These objects were initially catalogued as mundane storage vessels. It was Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist working at the museum in 1938, who first looked at the collection and voiced a hypothesis so anachronistic it was immediately dismissed by most of his peers. He suggested these were not jars for scrolls or spices, but ancient electric batteries. The claims seemed to belong to the realm of fantasy, not serious scholarship. How could a civilization existing centuries before Galvani's twitching frog legs or Volta's first pile possibly have understood the principles of electrochemistry? The Baghdad Battery thus entered the realm of forbidden artifacts, a persistent anomaly that refuses to be comfortably catalogued. The standard historical account is clear and unequivocal. The systematic study and application of electricity begins in the 18th century with figures like Benjamin Franklin and Luigi Galvani. The first true battery, the voltaic pile, was invented by Alessandro Volta in 1800, a stack of alternating zinc and copper discs separated by brine-soaked cloth. This discovery unleashed the fields of electrochemistry and electromagnetism, paving the way for the modern world. The ancient world, while possessing profound knowledge in other areas, had no concept of current electricity. They knew of static electricity from amber electron in Greek, and they may have observed the bioelectric pulses of certain fish, but the generation of a continuous current through a chemical reaction was beyond their theoretical and practical framework. Therefore, the Baghdad find must be something else, a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, with the iron rod acting as a spindle and the copper cylinder as a protective case, sealed with bitumen to protect the contents from humidity. The crack in this dismissive narrative is the object's peculiar and highly specific construction. If it were merely a sealed storage jar, why the choice of two different metals? A simple clay jar with a tight-fitting lid would suffice. The use of copper and iron in close proximity, separated by an electrolyte, the now evaporated contents of the jar, which could have been vinegar, wine, or lemon juice, creates the perfect conditions for a galvanic cell. The asphalt seal is not just a lid, it is an excellent insulator, preventing the current from shorting between the central iron rod and the copper cylinder. In 1940, Willard F.M. Gray of the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, built a replica. Filling the jar with a grape juice electrolyte, he recorded a voltage output of approximately 1.5 to 2 volts. Subsequent replicas by other researchers have consistently generated a low, steady current. The object, quite simply, works as a battery. This is not speculation. It is reproducible empirical fact. The only debate is whether its builders knew what they had created. The evidence lies in the physical and chemical properties of the artifacts themselves. Multiple batteries were found, suggesting a standardized design, not a one-off oddity. The choice of metals is critical. Iron and copper have a significant difference in their electrode potentials, making them an effective pair for generating electricity in an acidic medium. The bitumen seal, a naturally occurring asphalt, is chemically inert and perfectly seals the top, holding the rod firmly in place and isolating it from the cylinder. This is not a haphazard construction. It displays a purposeful selection of materials that align exactly with the requirements of a simple galvanic cell. Furthermore, the Parthian and later Sasanian empires, which controlled the region, were renowned for their sophisticated metalworking, particularly in gold and silver. This is where a compelling, though unproven, application emerges: electroplating. The alternative theory posits that these batteries were not for lighting or medical therapy, though faint tingling from such a low-voltage device could have been interpreted as a magical or healing sensation, but for a practical artisan purpose. The process of electroplating, depositing a thin layer of one metal, like gold or silver, onto the surface of another, like copper or iron, using an electric current, would explain a long-standing mystery in ancient Middle Eastern metallurgy. Museums contain numerous small artifacts, particularly from later Sasanian periods, that appear to be gold-plated with astonishing uniformity and thinness, a feat difficult to achieve solely by fire gilding using mercury, which was known. A cluster of these batteries connected in series could produce sufficient voltage for a rudimentary electroplating setup. An artisan could have suspended a silver statuette in a gold salt solution, connected it to the batteries, and slowly deposited a microscopically thin, even layer of gold. The motive for a cover-up here is not conspiracy but paradigm protection. Admitting the Baghdad Battery's intended use forces a radical rewrite of the history of technology, suggesting an empirical, trial-and-error discovery of electrochemistry that was later lost, perhaps because the knowledge was confined to a guild of artisans whose secrets died with them. The unanswered questions are glaring. No wires or conductors have been found with the batteries, though any such attachments would likely have been perishable metal strips or wires long since corroded. No ancient text, Parthian or Sasanian, describes anything resembling an electrical device. This is the artifact's greatest weakness as proof of intentional use, the absence of a paper trail. Did the makers truly understand the principle, or did they stumble upon a configuration that worked for their plating needs without a theory of why? The Baghdad Battery remains in a state of provocative limbo. It is functionally a battery. It fits a plausible and elegant purpose within its cultural context. Yet, without corroborating evidence, a depiction, a text, a workshop find with connected batteries and plating vats, it remains an enigma. It defies explanation, not because it is impossible, but because it stands alone, a silent, terracotta testament to the possibility that the spark of discovery can flare up in unexpected times and places, only to be swallowed again by the darkness of history, leaving behind nothing but a strange, sealed pot that shouldn't work, but does. The Dropa Stones, discs from a celestial crash. The high, wind-scoured borderlands of the Bayan-Har Mountains in Qinghai Province, China, are a place of profound isolation. It was here, in 1938, according to an account that has become equal parts legend and historical thorn, that a Chinese archaeologist named Kai Pu-Te is said to have led an expedition into a series of interlinked caves. What they found inside was not the expected debris of ancient human habitation, but something far more bizarre. The caves showed signs of deliberate, geometric organization, their walls smoothed and squared. Scattered across the floors, partially buried in the dust of millennia, were hundreds of stone discs, each roughly 9 inches in diameter, 3/4 of an inch thick, with a perfectly circular hole in the center. They resembled nothing so much as primitive stone records, or in the modern parlance that would later attach to them, vinyl records. But alongside these discs, the expedition reportedly made a more disturbing discovery: a row of neat, walled burial niches containing the skeletons of small, fragile beings with disproportionately large skulls. The narrative that emerged from this find, filtered through wartime chaos, political revolution, and a dearth of verifiable primary evidence, would become one of the most persistent and controversial forbidden artifact stories of the 20th century, the tale of the Dropa Stones. The standard academic response to the Dropa story is one of uniform and thorough dismissal. It is categorized as a modern myth, a classic, out-of-place artifact tale that originated in the fertile ground of mid-century ufology and was amplified by sensationalist authors. Mainstream archaeology asserts there is no credible record of Kai Pu Te, no official Chinese archaeological report from 1938 detailing such a find in the remote Bayan Har range, and no trace of the skeletons or the discs in any reputable museum collection. The story, as commonly told, first appeared in German UFO magazines in the 1960s, authored by a writer named Reinhard Wegemann, and was later popularized by Erich von Däniken in his 1968 bestseller Chariots of the Gods. The explanation is simple. The Dropa Stones are a fiction, a conflation of misunderstood Chinese folk tales, the universal human fascination with strange stones, and the burgeoning desire for evidence of ancient astronauts. The skeletons, if they existed at all, were likely those of apes or deformed humans, misinterpreted in a pre-scientific context. The crack in this dismissive facade appears in the form of stubborn, secondary claims and a handful of tantalizing, blurry photographs. Proponents of the story point to a 1962 article in the Soviet magazine Sputnik, and a claimed 1968 analysis by Dr. Tsum Nui, a name that itself raises red flags, as it is not a standard Chinese name, at the Beijing Academy of Ancient Studies. This analysis allegedly revealed that the grooves spiraling out from the central holes of the discs were not decorative, but actually a microscopic, double-track hieroglyphic script. When deciphered, the script supposedly told a catastrophic story. The discs were the recorded history of a people called the Dropa, whose spacecraft crashed in the mountains thousands of years ago. Unable to repair their ship, the survivors were stranded and encountered the hostile local Ham tribes. The discs chronicled their despair and gradual decline. This narrative, while scientifically outrageous, provided a complete and emotionally resonant package. Furthermore, blurry black and white photographs purporting to show the discs, and even one of the large skulled skeletons, have circulated for decades. Their provenance is murky, their quality poor, but they serve as visual anchors for the story, making it feel less like a pure literary invention and more like a suppressed discovery. The evidence, however, is where the Dropa case fractures into fragments of hearsay and ambiguity. The primary physical evidence, the stones and skeletons, has never been made available for independent, scientific examination by international researchers. No museum in China lists them in its inventory. The secondary evidence consists almost entirely of magazine articles in fringe publications, themselves often citing one another in a closed loop. The decipherment is the greatest red flag. The claim of a microscopic, spiral script on hard granite, written thousands of years ago, stretches the bounds of both ancient technology and modern credulity. Granite is exceedingly difficult to inscribe with fine detail without modern tools. More plausible, but still unverified, is a later theory that the discs might be biotite discs, a form of mica which could be carved more easily. Some investigators have suggested the entire story may be a distorted memory of the discovery of discs, ancient Chinese jade artifacts with central holes used in burial ceremonies, though these do not have spiraling grooves. The lack of a clear chain of custody, from the alleged 1938 discovery to any known institution, is a fatal flaw from an archaeological perspective. The motive for a potential cover-up, if one believes the story to have a kernel of truth, is typically framed within the context of Chinese politics and national pride. The initial discovery reportedly occurred just before the chaos of World War II and the subsequent Chinese Civil War. The Communist victory in 1949 ushered in an era of strict state control over history and archaeology, where narratives had to align with Marxist historical materialism and the glory of China's indigenous human development. The story of the Dropa, implying an extraterrestrial origin for a Chinese ethnic minority. Some versions link the Dropa to the modern-day Dropka or Dzopa people of Tibet, or a pre-human advanced civilization, would have been ideologically unacceptable. It would challenge the state-sanctioned narrative of continuous, earth-bound human progress. Thus, the theory goes, the artifacts were seized, research was suppressed, and foreign investigators were denied access. This created a perfect vacuum, which was then filled with speculation, embellishment, and outright fabrication from the West. The unanswered questions are fundamental and haunting. Did any archaeological expedition in the 1930s discover unusual stone discs in a cave in China? Are the circulating photographs genuine artifacts of something, even if misidentified? Or is the entire edifice, from Kai Pu Te to Tsum Amnui, an elaborate cross-cultural hoax? The Dropa Stones defy historical explanation, not because they provide evidence of ancient astronauts, but because they exist in a shadowland between total fiction and a lost, mundane truth that has been irretrievably distorted. They are a modern artifact of our own desires, a Rorschach test in stone. They represent the human longing for a dramatic, hidden history, for proof that we are not alone, and for the existence of secrets so profound that powerful forces would conspire to keep them hidden. In the end, the greatest mystery of the Dropa Stones may not be their origin, but their enduring power. They are a forbidden artifact of the information age, a testament to how a story, once launched into the world without the ballast of verifiable fact, can take on a life and a substance of its own, forever hovering just beyond the reach of proof or disproof, forever defying a final, satisfying explanation. The Voynich manuscript, a botanical code from nowhere. In the hallowed silence of the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, secured in a climate-controlled vault, lies perhaps the most famously inscrutable object in the world. It is a small book, approximately 6 by 9 inches, comprising 240 fragile vellum pages. It is covered from edge to edge in a flowing, unknown script, organized into paragraphs that drift around meticulously painted illustrations of a world that is at once familiar and profoundly alien. There are delicate, unidentifiable plants with swollen roots and strange leaves. There are diagrams of celestial spheres featuring unfamiliar constellations. There are intricate networks of pipes and barrels connecting plump, nude women bathing in greenish, possibly therapeutic fluids. This is the Voynich manuscript. Carbon dated to between 1404 and 1438, and first recorded in the possession of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf Roman II of Prague in the late 16th century. Its journey to modern fame began in 1912, when Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich purchased it from a Jesuit college in Italy. Since its public unveiling, it has resisted the concerted efforts of the world's top cryptographers, linguists, mathematicians, and historians. It is a 600-year-old puzzle that has consumed lifetimes and reputations, a book that declares it contains information but refuses to yield a single decipherable word. The standard narrative positions the Voynich manuscript as a singular, magnificent enigma. Its text displays statistical properties consistent with a natural language. It has word entropy, patterns of word repetition, and sentence structures that mimic genuine communication, yet it matches no known language, living or dead. The illustrations are equally confounding. The herbal section depicts plants that are botanical chimeras, combining features of multiple species into impossible hybrids. The astronomical section shows zodiac-like symbols, but the arrangements are nonsensical to historians of medieval astronomy. The biological section, with its interconnected tubes and nymphs, suggests an alchemical or physiological treatise, but follows no known medieval schematic for the human body or distillation apparatus. The leading academic theory, therefore, is that it is an elaborate, meaningless hoax, likely created in the 15th century to be sold as a valuable book of secrets to a wealthy patron like Rudolf Roman II, who was known for his fascination with the occult and the exotic. It is, in this view, a medieval grifter's prop, a volume of gibberish crafted with care to simulate profundity. The crack in the hoax theory is the manuscript's maddening internal consistency and staggering cost of production. Creating a 240-page vellum book in the early 15th century was an enormously expensive undertaking. Vellum was costly, and the hours of labor required for the detailed, colorful illustrations and the neat, unbroken cursive script would have been immense. For a hoax, it is over-engineered to a pathological degree. Furthermore, statistical analyses by modern computers, including studies applying algorithms that can distinguish between meaningful text and random nonsense, often conclude the text has a complex, structured nature that is extremely difficult to fake without a deep understanding of linguistics. The script shows distinct dialects between sections herbal, astronomical, etc., suggesting different topical content. The word distributions are not random. They follow Zipf's law, a pattern found in all natural languages where the most common word appears roughly twice as often as the second most common, and so on. A medieval forger would have no knowledge of such linguistic laws, making a conscious fabrication of this complexity nearly impossible. The physical evidence is the manuscript itself, and the data extracted from it. The vellum, ink, and pigments have been authenticated and dated to early 15th century northern Italy. The illustrations, while strange, are rendered in a style consistent with the period. The key evidence lies in the text structure. In 2014, a paper by Dr. Stephen Bax, a professor of applied linguistics, proposed a partial decipherment based on identifying proper nouns for plants. He suggested, for example, that a recurring word alongside a drawing of the starflower Trallius europaeus might be its name, Taurus, or a variant. This approach yielded tentative, contested identifications for a handful of plants and stars, suggesting the script might be a phonetic representation of a known but obscure language or a constructed cipher. More recently, in 2019, an academic from the University of Bristol made headlines claiming the manuscript was a mostly plagiarized health guide for women, written in a lost form of abbreviated Latin. This theory, too, has faced intense criticism and failed to achieve consensus. Each new solution collapses under the weight of its own exceptions, unable to translate more than a few isolated phrases without contradiction. The motive behind the manuscript's creation, if it is not a hoax, remains its deepest secret. The lost language theory posits it was written in a vernacular so regional or obscure it died out without a trace, or in a constructed, universal language, predating known examples by centuries. The cipher theory suggests it protects genuinely valuable information, an alchemical recipe, a heretical religious text, or a revolutionary medical treatise, meant only for the eyes of an initiated few. The pharmaceutical compendium theory aligns with the images of plants and bathing women, suggesting a guarded guild secret for women's medicine or herbal birth control, knowledge that would have been dangerous to commit to plain text. The historical cover-up is not an active suppression, but the natural oblivion of time and the death of its linguistic key. Its secrets were so well kept that they were lost even to its inheritors. Emperor Rudolph Roman II ownership suggests it was valued, but there is no record he or his court ever understood it. It passed from hand to hand for centuries, a beautiful, baffling curiosity, its original purpose erased. The unanswered question is existential: will the Voynich manuscript ever be read? It has survived wars, fires, and the scrutiny of geniuses from Renaissance cryptologists to modern NSA supercomputers. It represents the absolute limit of our ability to recover lost knowledge. It defies explanation not merely because it is old, but because it is a perfect black box from a past mindset. It may encode a language, a science, or a spirituality so different from our own that we lack the conceptual framework to recognize it, even if we saw it. It is the ultimate forbidden archive, a volume that sits openly in one of the world's great libraries, its pages available for all to see, yet its meaning locked away as securely as if it were in a buried vault. It challenges our faith in the recoverability of history, whispering that some doors, once closed by time, may never open again, leaving behind only the ghost of intention in the form of elegant, incomprehensible script curling around painted stars and impassable flowers. The London hammer, a tool embedded in stone. On a rocky outcrop along the banks of Red Creek near the town of London, Texas, in the summer of 1936, a chance discovery was made that would become a cornerstone of the out-of-place artifact phenomenon. As the story is recounted, a local couple, Mr. and Mrs. Max Hahn, were walking when they noticed a curious piece of loose rock with a protrusion of wood from its core. Taking it home, they later cracked it open to reveal an object that defied simple categorization, an iron hammerhead with a partially petrified wooden handle, completely encased within a solid concretion of Cretaceous period rock. The artifact, which came to be known as the London Hammer or the London Artifact, was eventually acquired by creationist researcher Carl Bohr, in whose museum it now resides. The claim is as straightforward as it is geologically incendiary. A modern-style tool was found embedded in stone dated to over 100 million years old, a time when, according to conventional science, humans did not exist, and the dominant life forms were dinosaurs. It is presented as physical, undeniable proof of a human presence, or at least a tool making intelligence in the deep, deep past. The standard geological and archaeological explanation is one of modern misinterpretation and natural formation processes. Geologists identify the surrounding stone not as a solid, ancient Cretaceous bedrock layer, but as a limestone concretion. Concretions are hard, compact masses of mineral matter that form around a nucleus within sedimentary rock layers, often precipitated from groundwater. They can form relatively quickly, in centuries or even decades, cementing around any object that serves as a nucleus. The official dismissal posits that the hammer is a late 19th century miner's or blacksmith's tool, likely dropped or discarded in a crevice. Over time, mineral-rich waters percolated through the sediment, depositing layers of calcite, iron oxide, and other minerals around the tool, creating a hard, rock-like casing. The partial petrification of the wooden handle is also consistent with this process. Minerals can replace organic material, creating a stone-like cast. Thus, the artifact is not in ancient rock. The rock formed around it in a much more recent time frame. It is a curiosity, but not an anomaly. The crack in this comfortable explanation is driven by the specific claims made about the hammer's composition and its encasement. Proponents, led by Bohr and others, point to metallurgical analysis reportedly conducted on the iron head. They claim the iron is of exceptional purity, lacking the slag inclusions typical of 19th century smelted iron, and shows a peculiar internal chloride structure, suggesting it was forged without oxygen, a modern technique. Furthermore, they argue the concretion itself is not a loose nodule, but was part of the solid creek bank bedrock, which they assert is indisputably of the Cretaceous period. The hammer handle's petrification is also cited as evidence of great age, as the process is assumed to require millennia. The narrative of its discovery, embedded in solid rock, if taken at face value, is viscerally compelling. It presents a physical paradox, a clearly human-made object in a geological context that predates humanity by tens of millions of years. This paradox is the engine of its forbidden status. The evidence, however, is deeply contested and mired in issues of provenance and independent verification. The initial discovery lacks contemporaneous, documented scientific scrutiny. The artifact's current home in a creationist museum, with a stated ideological mission to disprove conventional geology and support a young Earth timeline, casts a long shadow over all subsequent analyses. Independent geologists who have examined photographs and descriptions uniformly state the concretion is typical of those found along Texas Creek beds, which form around modern debris. The key claim, that the hammer was found in situ within solid, undisturbed Cretaceous rock, is uncorroborated by any geological survey or photographic evidence from 1936. The metallurgical analyses suggesting advanced forging are not published in peer-reviewed scientific journals and cannot be verified by the broader scientific community, as the artifact is not available for unrestricted testing. In essence, the primary evidence is the object itself, held in a private collection, and the story of its finding. All scientific data from it flows through a single, ideologically motivated source. The motive for promoting the artifact as ancient is clear within the context of the creation-evolution debate. For young Earth creationists, Artifacts like the London hammer are UFARTs, out-of-place artifacts that serve as potent weapons to challenge the geological timeline and, by extension, evolutionary theory. If a human tool can be shown to exist in dinosaur-era rock, the entire edifice of deep time collapses. This creates a powerful incentive to interpret all data in a way that supports great age and to dismiss naturalistic explanations like concretion formation as special pleading. On the other side, the mainstream scientific motive to dismiss it is equally clear. It represents an anomaly that, if validated, would overturn fundamental paradigms. This leads to a hardened stalemate. Mainstream science dismisses it due to lack of credible provenance and the overwhelming weight of contrary evidence, while proponents accuse the establishment of a dogmatic cover-up, refusing to examine evidence that threatens its worldview. The unanswered questions are less about the hammer itself and more about the sociology of belief and evidence. What would it take to resolve the mystery? A fully transparent, multidisciplinary investigation conducted by independent, accredited geologists, metallurgists, and archaeologists, with the results published in a peer-reviewed journal. This has not happened, and is unlikely to happen given the artifact's custodianship. So, the London hammer remains in a state of perpetual contention. It defies historical explanation not because it is clearly an ancient artifact, but because it exists at the fiery intersection of science, ideology, and evidence. It is a Rorschach test. Some see definitive proof of a forgotten human epoch, or even pre-Adamite civilizations. Others see a perfectly ordinary tool caught in a fascinating but mundane geological process, elevated to mythical status to serve a modern ideological purpose. Its power lies in its simplicity, a hammer in a rock, a paradox so basic it challenges the very framework by which we decide what is possible in history. It is a forbidden artifact not necessarily of ancient origin, but a forbidden conclusion, forever suspended between two irreconcilable visions of the past. The Saqqara bird, a model of forgotten flight. In the dust-filled storerooms of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, catalogued under number 6347, lies an object discovered in 1898 during the excavation of the Padi Amen tomb in Saqqara, dated to approximately 200 BCE. It is a small wooden artifact, just over 6 inches long, carved from sycamore wood. To the untrained eye, it is a stylized bird figurine, a common enough funerary offering in a culture that revered avian deities like Horus and Thoth. It has a falcon's head, a stylized eye, and what appear to be feathers etched along its body. But a closer examination reveals aerodynamic details that are, at the very least, profoundly unusual. The artifact, known as the Saqqara bird, lacks the legs one would expect on a perched bird. Instead, its lower body is smooth and streamlined. Most strikingly, its wings are not carved in a resting or decorative pose. They are straight, angled, and perfectly perpendicular to the body, with a distinct downward curving airfoil cross-section, a design that generates lift. This simple piece of funerary art has, in the last half-century, become the focus of a heated debate. Is it merely a child's toy or a ritual object? Or is it a scale model of a working glider, evidence of aeronautical principles understood in ancient Egypt? The standard Egyptological interpretation is firmly rooted in symbolism and ritual. The Saqqara bird is classified as a votive object, a ceremonial offering. Its bird form connects it to the soul, Ba, which was often depicted as a human-headed bird, or to solar deities associated with flight. The lack of legs is not remarkable. Many such models were made to be placed in tombs, not to stand on shelves. The straight wings could represent a stylized interpretation of a bird in a specific, heraldic pose, common in Egyptian art, where perspective and naturalism were often secondary to symbolic clarity. Proponents of this view point to the myriad other bird figurines found in Egyptian tombs, none of which are suggested to be aircraft models. They argue that imposing a modern, technological interpretation on a religious artifact is a classic case of pareidolia, seeing a familiar pattern, an airplane, in an ambiguous stimulus, a stylized bird. It is, they insist, a bird and nothing more. The crack in this symbolic interpretation was opened not by Egyptologists, but by an aeronautical engineer. In 1969, Dr. Khalil Messiha, an Egyptian physician and model plane enthusiast, was examining the artifact in the museum. Trained to see aerodynamic forms, he was struck by features that seemed to transcend artistic stylization. The wings had a precise dihedral angle for lateral stability. The body, or fuselage, was laterally symmetrical and streamlined. He noted a small, fin-like protrusion on the underside of the tail, which he interpreted as a missing vertical stabilizer. Its other half had broken off, leaving a clean slot. Messiha constructed a balsa wood scale model of the artifact, adding the hypothesized tail fin for balance. When launched, the model reportedly exhibited smooth gliding capabilities. His brother, a flight engineer, corroborated the aerodynamic potential. This sparked a controversy that has lingered for decades. Had the ancient Egyptians, master observers of nature, abstracted the principles of flight from birds and insects and codified them in a model? The physical evidence is the artifact itself and the data from subsequent tests. In 2006, a team including Simon Sanderson, a specialist in aerodynamics and fluid dynamics, built a precise, larger-scale model for a television documentary. Tested in a wind tunnel and as a radio-controlled glider, the model, with the added tail fin, demonstrated stable flight characteristics. It generated lift and could perform gentle maneuvers. These tests suggest the shape, whether by accident or design, is inherently aerodynamic. However, critics of the glider theory offer powerful counter-evidence. The most significant is the lack of any evidence for a launching mechanism or control surfaces. A model glider without a launcher is just a carving. Furthermore, the slot for a tail fin is disputed by some Egyptologists, who see it as simple damage or a carving irregularity. The etched feathers on the wings also argue against a pure machine interpretation. They are a decorative, biological detail. The artifact sits uncomfortably between two worlds. Its form hints at function, but its context and craftsmanship are wholly artistic and ritualistic. The motive for creating such an object, if it were an aerodynamic model, is a profound mystery. There is no textual or archaeological evidence for any Egyptian experimentation with flight beyond kites, which may have been known. The theory posits it could have been a design model for a ceremonial glider used in temple rituals, perhaps a large, lightweight construction that would be launched from a high place during a festival to simulate divine flight. Alternatively, it could represent the distilled knowledge of a genius artisan or priest who understood the principles of lift and stability, but had no means or need to scale it up to a manned vehicle. The knowledge would have been esoteric, perhaps linked to temple mysteries, and died with its possessor. The cover-up is not active suppression, but the total disconnect between this isolated artifact and the rest of the material record. It is an idea without a technological footprint. The unanswered questions are fundamental to understanding human innovation. Was the Saqqara bird the product of a fleeting, brilliant intuition about aerodynamics, captured in wood, but never developed? Or is our modern perspective, steeped in the language of aircraft, unconsciously projecting functionality onto a form that was purely symbolic? The artifact defies explanation because it is a perfect boundary object. To the engineer, its proportions whisper of calculated design. To the historian, its context shouts of ritual and symbol. It challenges our categories. It is a forbidden artifact not because it is hidden, but because its meaning is locked in a past mindset we cannot fully access. It sits in a museum case, a silent, wooden question. Did its maker see a bird, or did they, for a moment, see beyond the bird, past the flapping of wings to the serene, silent principle of gliding flight, capturing a truth about the air that would not be rediscovered for another 2,000 years? We may never know, and that very uncertainty is its power, a testament to the haunting possibility of lost knowledge hovering at the edge of history. The Piri Reis map, a chart of the impossible coastline. In the Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul in 1929, a discovery sent shockwaves through the world of cartography and history. Among a pile of disregarded documents, scholars uncovered a fragment of a world map drawn on gazelle skin parchment and dated to 1513. It was signed by an Ottoman Turkish admiral and cartographer, Piri Reis, who noted in marginal annotations that he had compiled it from 20 source maps, including some that dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. The map fragment showed the western coasts of Europe and Africa and the eastern coast of South America with startling, unnerving accuracy. But it was the lower portion of the map that ignited a firestorm of controversy. Below the equator, the map depicted a landmass, connected to South America with coastlines and geographic features that bore a suspicious and unsettling resemblance to the continent of Antarctica, a continent that, according to conventional history, was not discovered until 1820 by the Russian expedition of Bellingshausen and Lazarev. Even more impossibly, the coastline on the Piri Reis map showed Antarctica without its massive ice cap, depicting what could be interpreted as the continent's true subglacial topography. Knowledge supposedly inaccessible to any human until the advent of seismic sounding in the 20th century. The map posed a single blasphemous question. How could a 16th century Ottoman admiral have mapped a continent buried under a mile of ice? The standard scholarly explanation is one of misidentification and composite sourcing. Mainstream historians and cartographers argue that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is not Antarctica at all, but a speculative, mythical continent or a distorted representation of the southern coast of South America. The map's own annotations mention Antikythera and other legendary lands. The accuracy of the South American coastline, while impressive, can be attributed to Portuguese and Spanish charts that Piri Reis, as a famed corsair and compiler, would have had access to through capture or trade. The accuracy of the Antarctic coastline, proponents of this view assert, is a classic case of apophenia, seeing a meaningful pattern in random information. The squiggles of ink that seem to mirror the Queen Maud Land coast are just that, squiggles, coincidentally aligned when the map is projected onto a modern polar projection. They point out that the map contains known errors, such as the misplacement of islands and the distorted size of the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, The map is a remarkable historical document of early 16th century Ottoman cartography, but not an archive of impassable ancient knowledge. The crack in this rationalist interpretation was first forcefully driven by Professor Charles H. Hapgood in his 1965 book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Hapgood, a historian of science, undertook a meticulous study of the Piri Rise map and other Portolan charts. His central explosive thesis was that the map accurately depicted the coast of Antarctica as it would appear if free of ice. He argued that the detail was too specific to be coincidence, and that the only way Piri Rise could have incorporated it was by copying source maps that themselves were copied from far more ancient maps, drawn by a seafaring civilization with global reach in a remote, pre-glacial epoch. A civilization that had mapped the world, including Antarctica, during a warm period thousands of years ago. This lost civilization theory was given a veneer of scientific credibility when Hapgood enlisted none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote a supportive foreword to his book, intrigued by the geophysical implications of Earth crust displacement. The idea that the Piri Rise map held a snapshot of Antarctica from a time before the ice took hold became a foundational pillar of alternative history. The evidence hinges on cartographic analysis and later geophysical data. In the 1950s, seismic and core sampling surveys began to map the subglacial topography of Antarctica, when Hapgood and later researchers like Captain Lorenzo W. Burrows overlaid the Piri Rise landmass on these modern maps. The correlations were striking. Prominent features like the Palmer Peninsula, the Weddell Sea indentation, and the general profile of Queen Maud Land appeared to align. The map showed rivers and mountain ranges where modern surveys revealed subglacial valleys and elevations. This was the heart of the mystery. The map seemed to show not the icy outline, but the actual land beneath. However, critics have dismantled this argument point by point. They note that the Piri Rise fragment is small, its southern edge torn, making any definitive alignment speculative. The rivers could be decorative flourishes or soundings. Most damningly, a thorough study by cartographer Gregory McIntosh demonstrated that every geographic feature on the Piri Rise map can be traced to known early 16th century source maps and the common cartographic errors of the time. The Antarctica is likely a mismatched composite of the coast of Brazil, the Terra Australis myth and plain guesswork. The motive behind the creation of the original source maps, if Hapgood's theory is given credence, points to a cataclysmically lost chapter in human history. It suggests the existence of a sophisticated global maritime culture, perhaps the legendary civilization of Atlantis, or an unknown prehistoric seafaring people that undertook systematic exploration and mapping during the last interglacial period, over 10,000 years ago. Their cartographic knowledge, preserved in fragments in the great libraries of Alexandria or Constantinople, was passed down through copies of copies, eventually finding its way into the hands of medieval and Renaissance scholars like Piri Rise. The cover-up in this narrative is the mainstream academic refusal to entertain the possibility of such an advanced prehistoric civilization, as it would dismantle the orthodox timeline of human development. The map becomes a forbidden artifact because it is a tangible relic of a forgotten world age, a palimpsest where the geography of a lost epoch bleeds through the parchment of recorded history. The unanswered questions are as vast as the oceans the map portrays. Did a single brilliant cartographer in 1513 simply get lucky with a speculative southern continent that later turned out to be real? Or does the map genuinely contain the ghostly echo of an ancient geography, preserved through millennia of copying? The Piri Reis map defies final explanation because it exists at the precise intersection of demonstrable fact, historical context, and dizzying speculation. It is a forbidden archive not for what it definitively shows, but for what it might imply. It challenges the hubris of our historical narrative, suggesting that the age of discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries was not an origin, but a rediscovery. It serves as a permanent reminder that our maps of the past are always incomplete, and that the blank spaces on old charts might not represent ignorance, but lost knowledge. Knowledge of coastlines now locked in ice, and of civilizations swallowed by the rising seas of time. The Koso artifact, a spark plug in a geode. On February 13, 1961, 3 rock-hounding enthusiasts, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Mikesell, were collecting geodes in the Koso Mountains of eastern California near the town of Arlancha. Seeking stones with hollow cavities lined with crystals, they gathered several promising nodules. The next day, back at their gem shop, Mikesell was cutting one particularly hard geode on a diamond saw when he ruined his blade. Inside the stone, instead of the expected crystal cavity, he found a perfectly circular section of a hard, white ceramic material surrounding a 2mm metal core. Further examination revealed the object to be a mechanical device, a metal shaft surrounded by the ceramic cylinder, encased in a hexagonal, coppery sheathing that had turned to clay. To the finders, and later to a growing number of perplexed investigators, it bore an unmistakable resemblance to a modern spark plug. The problem, declared by geologists who examined the encasing material, was that the nodule was a genuine geode, and the process of concretion that formed it was estimated to take a minimum of 500,000 years. Thus was born the mystery of the Koso artifact, a 20th-century mechanical component seemingly imprisoned within a 500,000-year-old stone. The standard geological and skeptical explanation is a classic case of mistaken identity and misunderstood context. Critics, most notably Pierre Stramerg and Paul Heinrich, who conducted a definitive investigation in 1999, argue that the geode was not a true geode at all, but a hard, ferrous sandstone concretion. Such concretions can form around a nucleus very rapidly, in decades or centuries, in the right mineral-rich environment. The object inside, they concluded, was indeed a spark plug, but a fairly modern one. Specifically, they identified it as a 1920s-era Champion spark plug, a common type used in Model T Fords and other early automobiles. The ceramic was the typical porcelain insulator, the metal core the central electrode, and the rusted hexagonal sheath the corroded remains of the threaded metal body. The spark plug, they theorized, was likely dropped or discarded by a miner or motorist in the early 20th century. It fell into a muddy, iron-rich deposit, and through a rapid process of mineral accretion known as differential concretion, a hard rind of iron oxide, sand, and pebbles cemented around it. The finders, expecting a geode, misinterpreted the concretion as one. The crack in this neat explanation was initially driven by the original analysis sought by the finders. They had taken the artifact to a geologist at a local college, who reportedly X-rayed it and claimed the internal object was held within a perfectly symmetrical hard shell of clay, pebbles, and fossil shells. and that the object itself showed no signs of iron rust at the point of contact with the shell, suggesting it was not a recent inclusion. A second X-ray reportedly revealed a tiny spring or helix at one end of the metal shaft, a feature not found in simple spark plugs. These early, uncorroborated reports fueled the anomaly narrative. The story was then amplified in the landmark 1969 book, The Case for the UFO, by M.K. Jessup, who saw it as evidence of ancient advanced technology or extraterrestrial visitation. The artifact's subsequent disappearance from public view, reportedly after Wallace Lane began demanding a high price for it, only added to its mystique, transforming it from a curiosity into a forbidden relic, physically lost but ideologically potent. The evidence, upon rigorous modern examination, overwhelmingly supports the spark plug hypothesis. Stronach and Heinrich obtained detailed photographs and the original X-rays. Their key breakthrough was identifying the exact model, a champion spark plug from the 1920s, which featured a distinctive hexagonal nut design and a two-piece porcelain insulator that matched the Koso artifact's structure perfectly. The tiny spring visible in the X-ray was identified as a corrosion artifact or a misidentified part of the plug's internal gasket system. The surrounding matrix was shown to contain 20th-century organic fibers and a brass alloy nail, conclusively proving it was not an ancient geological formation. The rapid concretion process is well documented in similar environments. The arid, mineral-laden conditions of the Koso region could have encased the plug in a rock-hard shell within a few human generations. The artifact, therefore, is a textbook example of a pseudo-geode, a man-made object that underwent a natural process that made it appear immeasurably older. The motive for promoting the artifact as ancient or anomalous stems from the powerful human desire to find evidence of the extraordinary. In the 1960s, the space race and burgeoning UFO culture created a fertile ground for out-of-place artifact stories. The Koso artifact provided a perfect, tangible symbol, a familiar object in an impossible setting. It seemed to offer physical, rock-solid proof that challenged linear models of technological progress. For creationists, it could be twisted to challenge geological timelines. For ancient astronaut theorists, it was a piece of a crashed UFO's engine. The cover-up narrative emerged naturally from its disappearance. Proponents argued it was too threatening to the establishment, so it was suppressed or seized. In reality, its commercial value as a curiosity likely led to it being sold into a private collection, where it remains, its mystery solved, but its legend enduring. The unanswered question is not about the artifact's origin, which is settled among experts, but about the longevity of the myth itself. Why does the Koso artifact, despite being decisively debunked, continue to feature prominently in lists of forbidden artifacts? It defies historical explanation, not because it is unexplainable, but because it represents an archetype, the modern object in ancient stone. It is a compelling visual and conceptual paradox that is difficult to dislodge from the imagination. The artifact serves as a cautionary tale about the interaction between amateur discovery, preliminary speculation, and the creation of cultural legends. It reminds us that the true, forbidden knowledge is often the mundane truth that lies behind a sensational mystery. A truth that is, in its own way, a lesson in the fascinating and rapid power of geological processes to create convincing illusions of deep time. The Koso artifact is not a window into a lost civilization. It is a mirror reflecting our own enduring fascination with finding magic in the mundane, and our sometimes reluctant acceptance of simpler, less dramatic explanations. The Nampa figurine, a doll from the deep time. In the summer of 1889, workers drilling an artesian well in Nampa, Idaho, made a discovery that would quietly challenge the foundations of New World archaeology. As the drill pipe was being pulled from a layer of blue clay at a depth of approximately 300 feet, a small, humanoid figurine made of dark, baked clay was brought to the surface, clinging to the sand pump. The figure, just over 1.5 inches tall, was a carefully crafted female form with clearly delineated arms, legs, torso, and a head with faintly etched features. It showed signs of having been fired. The problem, as articulated by geologists who examined the well shaft and the stratigraphy, was the depth from which it came. The blue clay layer was part of the Glens Ferry Formation, a sedimentary deposit laid down during the Pleistocene epoch, dating to approximately 2 million years ago. According to the scientific consensus of the late 19th century, and largely still held today, humans did not exist in the Americas, let alone produce fired clay figurines at such an antediluvian date. The Nampa figurine thus became a silent, dirt-encrusted anomaly, an object that seemed to belong but arrived impossibly early. The standard archaeological explanation is one of intrusive deposition, or more likely, a hoax. The dominant theory is that the figurine is a genuine Native American artifact, perhaps only a few hundred or thousand years old, that fell or was introduced into the drill hole from a much higher level. The process of well drilling in 1889 was not the precise, cored operation of modern geology. The sand pump used would have been lowered and raised through the same borehole multiple times, creating the potential for surface material to be carried down and mixed with deeper sediments. Furthermore, the workers were not trained archaeologists. The exact depth and context are therefore suspect. Some scholars have suggested the figurine resembles the style of the Fremont culture or other later southwestern groups, placing it well within the conventional human timeline of the region, post 10,000 BCE. Its discovery during a period of intense debate about human antiquity in the Americas, and its immediate championing by those who believed in a deep human past, also raises the possibility of a deliberate plant to sway the scientific debate. The crack in this dismissive narrative was the credibility of the initial investigators and the specific geological conditions reported. The discovery was not made by fringe figures, but was reported to the Boston Society of Natural History by geologist George Frederick Wright, a respected, if conservative, scientist. He, along with other geologists who visited the site, examined the undisturbed layers of the well shaft and argued convincingly against intrusion. The blue clay layer was described as dense, homogeneous, and sealed with no evidence of a fissure or rat hole from the surface that could have allowed the figurine to slip down. The figurine itself was coated in identical iron oxide nodules as the surrounding clay, suggesting a long, contemporaneous existence. If it was a hoax, it was an exceptionally sophisticated one, requiring the hoaxer to have knowledge of deep stratigraphy and to plant the object in a way that would survive the violent, grinding action of the sand pump and emerge convincingly coated in the right minerals. For proponents, its crude but deliberate artistry spoke of human workmanship, and its stratigraphic context spoke of immense age. The physical evidence is the figurine itself, now housed at the Smithsonian Institution. It is made of clay mixed with quartz grains, and its surface bears the manganese and iron oxide staining consistent with long immersion in the deep, water-saturated clay. Its style is simple, but undeniably anthropomorphic. The primary evidence against its antiquity is not the object, but the paradigm it threatens. The mainstream model of the peopling of the Americas, the Clovis first theory, though now itself challenged by earlier sites like Monte Verde, posits human arrival no earlier than roughly 15,000–20,000 years ago. A 2-million-year-old artifact doesn't just push the timeline back. It shatters it and suggests either an entirely separate, far earlier wave of hominins, like Homo erectus in the New World, or a radical error in our geological dating methods. Neither conclusion is tenable without a cascade of corroborating evidence that simply does not exist. Therefore, the figurine must be an outlier, an error, or a fake. The motive for a potential cover-up, or more accurately, systematic neglect, is the protection of a coherent scientific narrative. In the late 19th century, the debate between uniformitarian geologists and biblical catastrophists was fierce. An artifact like Nampa became a pawn, eagerly seized by those arguing for a much older human race, perhaps even pre-Adamite. The scientific establishment, striving to professionalize and distance itself from theological disputes, had a strong incentive to demand irrefutable proof for such extraordinary claims. When subsequent excavations at the site failed to unearth more artifacts or bones, the figurine was relegated to the status of an unsolved curiosity. It was not actively suppressed, but filed away as an anomaly that could not be explained within the existing framework. A practice historian of science, Thomas Kuhn, would later identify as central to normal science. It was forbidden not by conspiracy, but by incongruence. The unanswered questions linger like the clay that birthed it. Could a Homo erectus group have crossed the Bering Land Bridge 2 million years ago and developed enough symbolic thought to create a figurine? It is a staggering possibility with no skeletal or tool making evidence to support it. Could the Glens Ferry Formation dating be flawed for that specific locality? Could there be an as yet unknown natural process that can form a clay concretion into a shockingly humanoid shape? The Nampa figurine defies explanation because it is an artifact of exquisite ambiguity. It is too simple to be clearly diagnostic of any known culture, yet too complex to be easily dismissed as a natural formation. It is a single data point from the dark, an object that surfaced from the deep time of the earth carrying a message we cannot decipher. It remains a permanent whisper from the strata, suggesting that the story of humanity in the Americas, or of intelligence itself, may have chapters written in clays and epochs we have yet to fully read, and that some of those chapters may have been lost to us forever, leaving behind only a tiny, baked clay woman, staring blankly from a museum drawer, holding a secret 300 feet deep and 2 million years old. The Wolfsegg iron, a cube of extraterrestrial industry. In the foundry of the Schönauer Hut Iron Works in Wolfsegg, Austria, in the year 1885, a block of coal being prepared for the furnaces was split open, revealing a startling inclusion. Nestled within the carbonaceous mass was a near-perfect cube of iron, roughly 2 inches on a side, weighing about 1.7 pounds. Its surfaces were smooth, with a deep groove encircling it, and its edges were slightly rounded. The coal seam from which it came was part of the Tertiary period's Eocene epoch, dated to approximately 60 million years before the present. The workers, baffled, turned it over to the mine's owner, who in turn gave it to the Salzburg Museum, where it was catalogued as a natural curiosity. The object, which came to be known as the Wolfsegg iron, the Salzburg cube, or the iron of the foundry, presented an immediate and profound paradox. This was not a raw nodule of iron ore. It was a geometrically precise, manufactured-looking object, discovered in a geological stratum that predated not only human industry, but the very emergence of the genus Homo. It was, by all conventional accounts, an impossibility, a machined artifact from the age of mammals. The standard geological explanation, developed after initial analysis, posits that the object is a perfectly natural formation, a meteorite, specifically an iron-nickel meteorite that had been shaped by terrestrial processes. In 1886, the geologist Adolf Gelt proposed this theory, noting its high nickel content, a signature of extraterrestrial iron. He suggested the cube's shape was the result of natural crystallization in a cubic system like pyrite, but iron-nickel, followed by eons of erosion within the coal bed, which smoothed its edges and carved the central groove. Later, in 1966-67, a detailed analysis at the Vienna Natural History Museum using electron beam microanalysis confirmed its meteoric origin, classifying it as a hexahedrite, a type of iron meteorite with a specific crystalline structure. The official verdict was clear. It was a rare but natural meteoritic iron mass, its suggestive shape a coincidence wrought by natural crystalline growth and erosion. It was removed from the realm of archaeology and placed firmly in the domain of geology and meteoritics. The crack in this naturalistic explanation was, and remains, the object's uncannily artificial appearance. Proponents of its anomalous nature, including some late 19th century scientists and later alternative researchers, argued that natural erosion does not produce such symmetrical, flat faces and a precise, continuous groove around the circumference. The groove, in particular, looked machined, like a channel for a cable or a casting seam. Furthermore, while hexahedrite meteorites can form cubic crystals internally, they do not naturally weather into perfect external cubes. The object's discovery inside a block of coal, with no signs of an impact crater or disturbance in the seam, also raised questions. If it were a meteorite that fell during the Eocene, how did it come to be perfectly enclosed in a forming coal bed, a sedimentary environment? Would it not have shattered or deformed the layered plant matter? The artifact's visual language screamed of design, forcing a persistent doubt that mere natural processes could account for its form. The physical evidence is the cube itself, and the scientific reports on its composition. The Vienna analysis is conclusive regarding its material. It is an iron-nickel alloy with accompanying cobalt and phosphorus, a composition unique to meteorites. It lacks the slag and impurities of smelted terrestrial iron. This definitively rules out a human, industrial origin. The analysis of its crystalline structure showed Widmanstetten patterns, intricate bands of nickel-iron alloys that form over millions of years of slow cooling in zero gravity, a fingerprint of its extraterrestrial and ancient cosmic origin. This is the most powerful evidence against it being an artifact. It was forged in space, not in a workshop. The shape, therefore, must be explained within natural parameters. Geologists suggest a combination of factors. The original meteoritic mass may have had a cubic cleavage. The immense pressures of the overlying strata during coal formation could have acted like a geological press, further shaping it. And chemical weathering within the moist, acidic coal environment could have etched the groove along a weaker crystalline plane. The motive for the enduring, forbidden artifact narrative is the powerful cognitive dissonance the cube creates. The human brain is a pattern recognition engine, and we are exquisitely tuned to see design, especially geometric design. A perfect cube is the quintessential shape of human industry, of machining, of intentionality. To accept that nature through a series of rare but plausible events can produce an object that so perfectly mimics a manufactured one is a difficult leap. It challenges our intuitive understanding of the world. Thus, the idea of a 60-million-year-old manufactured object, evidence of a pre-human industrial civilization, or even extraterrestrial visitors in the distant past, becomes a more satisfying story for some, despite the overwhelming chemical evidence to the contrary. The cover-up is imagined as the scientific establishment's rigid adherence to natural explanations in the face of an object that looks so obviously artificial. The unanswered question is not about the cube's origin, which is scientifically settled, but about the limits of natural mimicry. The wolf's egg iron defies historical explanation only if one insists on a human or human-like maker. It does not defy geological explanation. Its profound lesson is about the deceptive power of form. It stands as a monument to the fact that the natural world, through the immense spans of deep time and the interplay of chemistry, pressure, and erosion, can produce objects that appear meticulously crafted. It is a forbidden artifact of perception. It forces us to confront our own biases, our tendency to project our own methods of creation onto the universe. The cube is not a relic of a lost civilization from the age of mammals. It is a relic of the cosmos itself, shaped by the blind, patient forces of nature into a form that tricks the eye and ignites the imagination. It is the ultimate reminder that when investigating the forbidden archives of the past, we must be wary not only of forged documents, but of forged appearances, and that the most compelling mysteries are sometimes solved not by uncovering hidden truths, but by correctly interpreting the stunning, uncanny artistry of natural processes. 10 artifacts, 10 enigmas carved from stone, forged from metal, and inscribed on parchment, each one a fortress of mystery, resisting our best attempts at a final siege. We are left not with answers, but with a deeper, more profound question. What does it mean when the physical evidence of our past contradicts the story we've sworn is true? Does it mean we are wrong about history? Or does it mean we are wrong about ourselves, about the potential of the human mind to achieve, to forget, and to achieve again across the vast deserts of time? The search for that answer is what drives us. If you are driven by the same need to know, join our search party. Subscribe to the Forbidden Archives and ring the bell. Our next investigation is already underway. We leave you with this: of the 10 artifacts, which one, in your view, offers the strongest proof of a forgotten chapter in human history? Defend your choice in the comments. The debate is the first step toward a new understanding. This is the Forbidden Archives. We don't write history, we question it.